Between now and November 8th, Minnesotans will be casting their votes for governor and other constitutional offices, for the state legislature, and for members of Congress. Joining me to provide his perspective on the midterm election is the chair of the Minnesota Republican Party, David Hann. Thank you for being here.
Good to be with you.
You have been the chair of the Republican Party for nearly a year now, and the last time we spoke, you had just led the effort that allowed the Republicans to retake the majority here in the Minnesota Senate in 2017. How has your wealth of campaign and leadership experience helped you in your new role as party chair?
Well, I'm sure you know, and I'm sure most people know, that this kind of work, political work, is the result of many, many people doing lots and lots of things. So leading a caucus or leading a party is a little bit like being a coach of a team where you've got lots and lots of players, and most of the hard work is done by the players on the field. So I think in my case, having had some experience raising money and talking to donors has been helpful. And also I think my experience in the legislature has helped. I have lots of friends, lots of relationships with people who serve in the state house and the state senate, which has been helpful. And just having that background of experience with people in the political world, in the Republican political world, I think that's been helpful. And my goal has been to try to build an organization that has the capacity to be effective over time. And that's just kind of the nuts and bolts. It's not necessarily very, I guess, fancy or
glamorous.
Right, glamorous. It's kind of behind the scenes, but it's important work, and I think we've made good progress.
All 201 state legislative seats and 8 congressional seats will be on the November ballot in newly drawn districts. Is it harder to manage campaigns in new districts?
It can be. There's always, every 10 years when you do this, there's always some turnover, and there's always things that happen that are a little bit difficult to sort through. Sometimes legislators have to decide whether they're going to move somewhere or retire, and these things are always hard to predict before the maps are drawn. So those kinds of things tend to make the campaign prospects a little more challenging. But I think in this case this year, the districts that were drawn, we believe, have not been detrimental to Republicans in our efforts to retain the majority in the state Senate and capture the majority in the House. So even though there's always a change, and people sometimes complain about how legislators never retire, but in state legislators, certainly in Minnesota, we see a fair amount of turnover, which is not a bad thing. But as far as electorally, I don't think it's been an impediment. It's just means that we have had, in many cases, a lot of new candidates.
While high-profile statewide races like that for the governor's office or the attorney general are getting the bulk of political coverage, voters will find other party-endorsed candidates on their ballot. What are some of the common goals that a voter can expect by choosing or from choosing Republican-endorsed candidates?
I think one of the things that we've seen, and certainly through polling and focus groups and other activities that we've done, that the public has a fair amount of frustration with Democrat leadership, not only in Minnesota but across the country. The president is at a maybe historic low in terms of popularity, certainly in Minnesota, not well liked other than by stalwarts of the Democratic Party. And I think the governor and the legislative leaders, Democrat legislative leaders, have the same kinds of burdens. We've seen lots of things happen in the last 4 years that people have been unhappy with, notably the increase in crime and the apparent inability on the part of the governor and the legislative leaders, Democrat leaders, to try to adopt policies that would prevent it and restore confidence that people have. And I think the economy, that those two things are the big issues. And I think legislative candidates, as well as our statewide candidates, are trying to bring out to people that the conditions that we have today are the result of policies chosen by Democrats. And so if you're unhappy with crime, if you're unhappy with the faltering economy, maybe it's time to give Republicans an opportunity to lead in a different direction.
So you've previewed my next question, because generally speaking, the party not holding the White House, so generally benefits in midterm elections. And that would be good for Republicans, as you're saying, because it would be a kind of referendum against the current state of affairs. You mentioned the economy and crime. There's also the overturning of Roe v. Wade by the Supreme Court. Are those the main issues that you think voters are concerned about right now?
Well, everything that we've seen would suggest that crime and the economy, those two are by far the most pressing issues for most voters. The inflation has just been devastating to people on fixed incomes and lower income, and I think the crime affects everybody, and great concern over that. But there are other issues too. Education is a big issue. We've heard a lot about that. People frustrated with the response to the pandemic that the governor took in shutting down schools for almost 2 years. It caused a lot of upheaval. We've seen a deterioration of performance by students. So that is certainly a big issue. The overturning of Roe v. Wade, I think Democrats have, unfortunately, by misleading the public, tried to make it into an issue. I think they know as well as anybody that the Supreme Court has interpreted our Constitution to say that abortion is a protected right, and no governor, no individual can overturn that, and yet the Democrats are trying to, and spending a lot of money, trying to persuade people that somehow our governor candidate can do that magically. I don't know how. So I find that a little disappointing. The Democrats are willing to mislead the public in that way, but everything that we've seen says that the issues of the economy and crime are the top issues. Education is certainly in the mix, but there are other issues as well, healthcare among them.
In past years, it was common to pose a question in this kind of forum about the rural-urban divide. In this election year, there are a number of greater Minnesota legislative seats that lack a DFL candidate. There are a number of urban seats that lack a Republican candidate. Has a voter's regional residence become a stronger predictor of how they will vote?
Well, I'm not sure if I'd say it quite that way. I think that there are certainly characteristics in greater Minnesota that are different than the metro area. For one thing, if you live outside of the metro area, if you want to do anything, go to the store, go to church, go to school, you have to drive sometimes a significant distance. So when you talk about the rise in fuel prices, for example, really has a significant impact on people outside of the metro area. If you live in the metro area, you might be able to walk or ride a bus or something, but outside of the metro area, you don't have those kinds of options. So there are issues that are maybe more resonant with some voters rather than others. Certainly lots of agricultural issues that are very important to rural Minnesotans that most in the metro area are unfamiliar with. So there are issues, I think, that distinguish those two groups, and what we've seen in the past number of election cycles is that in greater Minnesota, Republicans have been able to speak to those issues more effectively than Democrats. You might say kind of the converse is true with respect to urban and metropolitan area voters, but we have this year been spending a fair amount of time trying to talk with and understand the issues for suburban, ex-urban, metro area voters, and we think that they share a lot of the concerns that the rest of the state shares. So we're trying to see if we can bridge that divide a little bit this time.
How has the preponderance of social media changed campaigning and fundraising? I'm seeing ads pop up in some of the apps that I use, but I'm also getting traditional pieces of mail in my mail. Is it different, the same? What's your take?
It's different, no question about it. Even in the time that I've been involved in politics, we've seen a whole lot of change with the advent of social media and the kinds of analytical tools that exist today that didn't even exist a few years ago when I was running for office in the state Senate. So I think there's a level of sophistication and the ability to understand what individual voters' interests are and to target messaging to them. It really is almost astounding the level of knowledge that some of the companies that do this have the ability to do. So that has certainly changed. In some respects, it's made reaching voters a little easier, but it's also a little more challenging. We used to do lots of phone calling. That's become a little more of a challenge. People don't typically answer their phone unless they know who it is. So I think there's been a change in how we do voter contact and how we do get out the vote and how we message to potential voters. So I'm not sure if it's harder or easier, but it is very different, and I think it does require some different tools, and both political parties, I think, have become more used to working in this new world.
Republican Party Chair David Hann, I want to thank you so much for your time today.
It's good to be with you.